At times during the winter months, we would occasionally go hungry but not starve. It seemed like a happy life as long as we had food in our mouths and warm clothing to wear, we were content with it. Our standards today are much bigger now compared to what we had then. Today we have excessive possessions, and we are not happy with our lives, and we struggle with life when we have all the conveniences now.
Many Inuit elders are haunted by a deep sense of loss. Yet, their testimonies before the Commission shone new light on a dark period and helped the Commission identify a number of common themes. The transition from Ilagit Nunagivagtangit to year-round settlements, housing in the settlements, settlement life and substance abuse, schooling and its effects on Inuit culture, the importance of hunting, the killing of qimmeat, health care and the separation or loss of family members, development and employment, and the poor communications and cross-cultural understanding. Before 1950, most Inuit lived on the land, sea, and ice. They moved to follow game and find the resources needed for clothes, shelter, food, and tools. 25 years later, most Inuit families lived year-round in government-created settlements. There were some benefits to this way of life, yet many Inuit could see that many aspects of their lives had become worse, not better. Some witnessed despair as family members coped with poverty, unable to afford small but costly improvements in food and housing. Some experienced hopelessness as they tried to adapt to strange and foreign ways of living. The Commission's work has shown that most government officials believed progress would be good for Inuit. They believed that a good future for Inuit and for Canadians depended on the North becoming more like the South. Changes came quickly when the government expanded its presence in the North after the Second World War. The government increased its involvement in almost every aspect of Inuit life: educating children, delivering medical care, distributing pensions and family allowances, and providing jobs. Officials felt that the services could not be delivered directly if the Inuit remained in more than 100 family-based groups throughout the region. People would have to access services in permanent communities. The government and Inuit believed that it would be possible to live in Ilagit Nunagivagtangat and access services in the settlements. Inuit would come into the settlements for a few weeks at a time and then return to the land. This pattern did not last for long. Some Inuit families decided in the 1950s that it would be best to move permanently into a settlement. They wanted to be near schools, get access to health care, or take advantage of housing. Others were given no real option and were relocated suddenly, harshly, and with little or no notice. Moses Kasarnak recalled being ordered to Pawn Inlet by police.
When the authorities like the police and social and family services officials ordered us to move to Pawn Inlet, we had no say and we had to comply with the orders from the authorities. We feared going against their orders and were afraid of the authorities. This was the case with all Hadlunat who held the power and positions in the new settlement life.
During Commission hearings, Inuit spoke often of their disappointment with housing. People were often misled about the cost of this housing. Many families agreed to move into settlements only to find there was no housing available. Apiakilakti and her family lived for nearly 2 years in a tent in Pond Inlet before getting a house.
All I remember is that my grandmother trying to use teapot to cook with, and that was for a whole winter. Our grandpa would, in the winter, would try and pick some cardboard boxes and put them in inside around the tent, and then when we had enough snow, he would build an igloo around the tent in order to keep us warm. And it was difficult for us, not knowing, coming to the community like that and not having housing.
A one-room, 10-foot square matchbox house like this was finally provided to Apia's family. 20 people called it home. Often overcrowded, poorly made, and unsuitable for the Arctic environment. Government-built houses were a leading cause of illness among Inuit, a fact the government was aware of as early as the 1950s. Officials tried to build better housing. In fact, the housing was the largest single investment made towards Inuit from 1950 to 1970. But the government officials could not see across the cultural divide that the concept of housing ownership and rental contracts were essentially foreign to Inuit. And it wasn't until the 70s that anyone in the government thought to ask Inuit for their ideas about solutions to the problem. Everything about traditional Inuit daily life and social relations changed in the settlements. Unable to hunt due to the loss of their dog teams, unable to afford snowmobiles, or unable to find jobs and provide for their families, many people turned to alcohol, gambling, and by the 1970s, illegal drugs to cope with the boredom or feelings of resentment, anger, and disillusionment. The social controls of the tightly knit Ilagit Nunagivagtangat, such as Picoyate, rules of acceptable behavior, and Pitaylinak, refraining from doing what is not allowed, were not easily adapted to fight the influence of alcohol and drugs in the settlements. Western society is not immune to their effects, but it can call on thousands of years of experience with drugs and alcohol. Inuit were encountering these foreign substances for the first time. Yet, the response from the officials was often moralistic and racist. To them, the drunkenness among Inuit was caused by character flaws rather than social conditions. By the 1970s, many Inuit families were experiencing firsthand the same devastating consequences of substance abuse that plagued families wherever alcohol and drugs were consumed to excess: addiction, abuse, child neglect, poverty, and death. Inuit were living in social conditions where substance abuse thrives, but they were given very little support to deal with the effects of that abuse. On the land, the Inuit children learned life skills by observation and practice. Fathers taught boys to hunt and feed their families. Mothers taught girls to prepare food and make clothing. Following the Second World War, government officials decided that Inuit children needed formal education so that they could become part of the mainstream Canadian society. Hostels were built to accommodate children in settlement residential schools. At first, the governments did not want parents or adults to move into the settlements, but many families moved off the land to remain near their children during the school year. Parents were eager for their children to be educated, but they were also told that family allowances would be lost if children were not in school. This was a serious threat, since this government assistance had become essential to the survival of many families. Some children had to travel much further. They were separated from their families and sent to schools as far away as Yellowknife, Ottawa, Iqaluit, Chesterfield, Churchill, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia. This was understandably traumatic for both parents and children. All children were taught a curriculum that had no relevance for life in the North, and no connection with their own culture and tradition, not even their language. Children were expected to learn exclusively in English, which few could speak when they started school. The Commission heard many disturbing stories about mental and physical abuse experienced by children who dared to speak Inuktitut or failed to speak in English.
I remember their first punishment was they had to put their hands on top of the desk, and with a short ruler, they will get 20 slaps in the back of the hand. For the second punishment, if they spoke Inuktitut again, they had to pull their pants down, bend over on the top of the desk, and with a yardstick, they will get 30 slaps on the bare bum in front of all the class. Now, if they did third offense, they were forced to eat a bar of soap. And what it did was it didn't make them sick. It did make them sick, but it didn't kill them. It made them throw up for 2-3 days. And they were told that is because you spoke of an evil language that we're no longer supposed to speak.
The government education system drove a thick wedge between young and old. Children lost their ability to speak Inuktitut and could no longer communicate with parents and grandparents. Filled with Southern knowledge, many young people lost touch and may never reconnect with Inuit cultural teachings, beliefs, and values. Hunting has always been a defining element of Inuit culture. Hunting instills a deep understanding of the environment, an understanding Inuit applied to help ensure the wise use of the game resources on which their survival depended. Government stepped up enforcement of the game laws in the Qikiqtani region in the 1950s. These were laws created without regard to northern realities, without the benefit of the Inuit extensive knowledge of the Arctic game. As a result, Inuit were often forced to hunt illegally because they had to catch more than the authorities allowed just to feed their families. While the government game laws were ignorant of Inuit hunting culture, the settlement life also posed a serious threat to hunting traditions. An Inuk who wanted to keep hunting and maintain his connection to the land had to also keep his qimmeet, or have enough money to purchase and maintain his snowmobile. The bond between qimmeet and their owner is best demonstrated in the Inuktitut term for dog team, qimuksit, a word that defines qimmeet and a hunter as a single unit. Qimmeet alone were no less culturally profound and essential for survival. They permitted families to travel long distances in search of food. They pulled hunters, equipment, and game. They helped locate and bring down game. They protected against predators and warned of sea cracks. In any conditions, they could be relied on to find their way home. The number of qimmeet declined dramatically in the 1950s. Some died of disease, some were shot before their owners moved into the settlements. Some were given up in favor of snowmobiles, and many were shot by government authorities out of fear the animals were a danger to people in settlements. Qimmeet are large and can be dangerous, but Inuit have managed them successfully for centuries. In settlements, however, dogs posed a new challenge. These animals were now exposed to more people and strange dogs. Many Kaluna were afraid of them. In response, the authorities, usually RCMP officers, shot loose Qimmiit, often without warning or explanation. The authorities acted under the ordinance respecting dogs. This was another unrealistic law, ignorant to the Inuit practices and animals to which it applied. Qimmiit that ran loose were unmuzzled or were not under control, could be caught by an officer. Animals that could not be caught could be destroyed. In many cases, the simplest solution for an RCMP officer was to shoot the Qimmiit. These deaths may be the Inuits' most distinct reminder of the difficult changes they experienced during the turbulent period between 1950 and 1970. Pain, anger, frustration, and remorse characterized the memories of many Inuit from his time. Pain at the death of so many Qimmiit, anger at the ignorance and inaction of the authorities, frustration at the senseless killing, remorse that Inuit did not do more to stop the killing. Inuit faced a variety of distressing relocations during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Moves to settlements, moves to faraway schools, and moves to receive health care. By the 1960s, settlements through the Qikiqtini region had nursing stations to provide basic health care. Medical personnel aboard the CD house screened people for various diseases. In cases of serious illness, government officials evacuated Inuit of all ages to southern hospitals, sometimes against their will. Anyone evacuated aboard the CD Howe had no hope of returning home until the following year, even if they have been misdiagnosed or their treatment lasted only a few weeks. Jaykulasi Qilikti's grandmother was taken away on CD Howe. Jaykulasi told the commission how a family member's departure was equivalent to their loss, as they would be gone so long and the likelihood of their return seemed so remote.
The only time we would see our grandmother was the next year, or as long as it took to heal. There was no airplanes, no means of mail, no means of communication with our loved ones. I remember them crying, especially the old ones. It was very traumatic, and it had a profound impact on our people.
For all Inuit, especially children, these medical trips were traumatic. As patients, they sometimes suffered humiliating treatment. Medical records were occasionally lost or mixed up. As a result, Inuit were sometimes returned to the wrong location. Some relatives were never informed of the death of a family member down south, or even received their loved one's remains. The government saw great economic potential in the north and believed Inuit could provide the labor force that would be needed. With jobs, the Inuit standard of living could come closer to that of the south. But the pace of the development was slow. Jobs were never as plentiful as everyone hoped. Low government expectations of the Inuit learning skills meant the quality of their education was substandard. As a result, Inuit employment opportunities were limited to secondary positions, manual labor, and clerical work. Inuit developed many of their own opportunities, some successfully, but those who worked for Qadlunat were sometimes mistreated and intimidated. Some Inuit were never paid for their services. Others were sent south for training but never given the opportunity to apply their skills. As a result, the region became a place of high unemployment. Families that had once been proudly self-sufficient became dependent on social assistance. Communication between Inuit and Qadlunat is difficult for obvious reasons. There is no common language, and the two cultures are based on vastly different worldviews and experiences, but these challenges can be overcome. When Inuit or Kadlunat have reached sincerely across the cultural divide, in business, art, or politics, the results have often been remarkable, but it is a difficult bridge to build when one culture sees itself as superior to the other. Between 1950 and 1970, Kadlunat tended to see it their place to speak and Inuit's place to listen. Inuit were not culturally inclined to challenge Kadlunat, who were quick to take advantage of an Inuk's deference to authority. Inuit often learned English, usually because they had little choice. But government officials made few attempts to understand Inuit language or culture. They believed their role was to guide Inuit along the difficult path to full integration with the South. They tended to carry out this role while showing hostility, indifference, or romanticism towards Inuit culture. The tragedy of this patronizing approach is that a greater measure of cultural understanding, a more meaningful dialogue between the government and the governed, could have ensured Inuit a more active role in their own affairs, and given the Kadlunat the benefit of Inuit's deep wisdom and valuable knowledge about the North. The Commission's complete findings are contained in its final written report. Also included are a number of background documents, the Commission's analysis of the 2006 RCMP Sled Dogs report, a study of the cultural bias and colonial state of mind that characterized government between 1950 and 1975, and a study of the relocations, migrations, dislocations, and evacuations Inuit experienced during the same period. This video continues now with Part 3, the final recommendations of the Qikiqtani Truth Commission.